Welcome back. When thinking about what hazards are present in our field site and what risks need to be managed, it can be helpful to think about the difference between what we perceive to be likely risks and what are actually likely risks. Perceived risks are those that come to mind first when we think about our field site, though they are statistically rather unlikely. For example, a helicopter crash, shark or polar bear attacks, rockfall, avalanche burials, those sorts of things. Actual risks are those that we might easily overlook but can have profound consequences. For example, altitude sickness, poor hygiene and food poisoning, infection of cuts and bruises, etc. Let's hear from a voice in the field about what that might look like.
I think one of the challenges is when you go into, different climates to do your research, is that often the people that are the experts in those areas have an assumed knowledge of things which you just don't know about, and so really having those conversations before you get there and really trying to tease out those things are important. So, for example, in the tropics, it might be something like chiggers, right? That everybody deals with all the time, and they don't mention it. And then, if you don't know that, you can go out with inappropriate clothing, or maybe you haven't used some deep wipes effectively to protect areas that are hit by chiggers, something like that. And you could pick your favorite wildlife example for that, from bears to snakes. But there are some things that people just have an assumed understanding of, which takes a bit of time to learn. One of the ones that we wrestled with going into Brazil was malaria, and we were all worried about it because you go to the occupational medical place, they say, "Oh, malaria," and then when you get there, the locals and the experienced people aren't worrying about it because they understand that that the mosquito is a vector for the disease, and where we are, there's no disease, so you don't have to worry about it. Or it's very dry; it's the dry season, and so you don't have to worry about it. And so things like that are just really worth trying to understand.
While we need to think about mitigation strategies for the less likely hazards, for example, to know what habitat to avoid for certain animals, to wear a helmet or a life jacket, it may be even more important to implement good protocols for managing the most likely risks. For example, washing hands well and avoiding unwashed or uncooked foods, or even just wearing good shoes to reduce the chances of spraining your ankle. Everyone's background will influence their perception and comfort level of a situation, and therefore the risks that we encounter. Perceived risks can stem from our fears or personal experience with adversity, like inclement weather, maybe a fear of flying, lack of experience with loose terrain, or from our identity. For example, an individual who identifies as queer may assume that their non-queer team member might judge or harass them while conducting research. Actual risks can also vary based on our identities and experiences. How acclimatized we might be for work at high elevation, or, following the previous example of a queer researcher, conducting research in a country that has anti-queer laws, introducing a risk of assault in the field based on identity. More discussion of ways in which identity may affect our experience in the field is coming up in Module 6. The larger point here is that perceived and actual risks can be very different depending on who we are. In this lesson, we introduce the difference between risks we perceive to be likely as compared to those that are actually likely, and how they may be influenced by each individual's experience and identity. In the next lesson, we'll keep these concepts in mind as we introduce a tool for making decisions in the context of risk.